Thin Wood Walls, Chapter 12. Except for the increasing cold, except for seeing Philip less and less, the days seemed the same, like the Canada geese that swarmed over the flat country around us, on their way to somewhere far off and warm. One would spread its wings and leave, but another just like it would take its place. All the days we spent huddled around our little stove seemed like one day. All the hours at school, one long hour. The countless games of marbles, one game. The walks with Mike or May, talks of all the war, our futures, the endless days of waiting, all the same, all one. When would they end? When would I see Dad? Christmas Eve arrived, a shadow of the ones I remembered. We went to a party at the mess hall for people in our block. Little kids sang Silent Night off-key and decorated a sparse-limbed tree with scraps of cloth and paper. The refreshments were too familiar: graham crackers and peanut butter, canned fruit. I saw forced smiles and cheer and people dressed up in whatever decent clothes they had, pretending not to notice if someone else's were patched or threadbare or faded. I hoped no one would look closely at mine. I wore a white shirt, frayed at the cuffs, my church slacks hovering over my ankles, and my only pair of shoes, scuffed and gnawing at my toes. Both Mom and Mike had offered to buy me something new at the dry goods canteen or through the Montgomery Ward catalog, but I told them no. They were going without new clothes and not complaining. I could too. May was there with her family. She brought me warm punch. Her hair was combed neatly. Her blue dress looked almost new, but shorter than when I had seen her wear it at St. Paul's. "You look very dressy tonight, Joseph." "Church clothes." She raised an eyebrow, and I waited for her to say something about me attending services again. But she didn't. "You look nice too," I said, remembering my manners. "Church clothes," she said. "But you don't have to dress up to go to church here," she smiled. "Huh?" I said. Philip wasn't at the party. I didn't know if his family was Buddhist or if it was just that his father was a humbug about Christmas the way he seemed to be about other things. The next morning we opened gifts from the canteen, magazines, combs, candy, or from old neighbors. Ray sent me a new baseball. I had sent him nothing but a wish for a Merry Christmas on a card I made myself. I put his gift in my duffel. I didn't plan to take it outside. An earlier snow had melted and turned the thawing dirt into a sea of mud that reached in every direction outside our barracks. I would save the baseball for spring. Or home. I wondered if Ray's basketball court had gone soft with rain. The old year, 1942, ended. I was glad to see it go. The new one didn't seem much different, at first. But January soon brought excitement, rolling across Tule Lake like a tsunami. Mike burst into the room one afternoon, nearly ripping through the line of full of drying clothes that Mom had strung from wall to wall. He barely noticed. His smile was wide. "Dad is being freed wide. The war is over wide. They're going to let us fight." "Who?" Mom said. "Us." He paced back and forth. "Nisei. They told us at school. The Army's going to recruit an all-Nisei combat team." "How many men?" Mom said. She wasn't smiling. Grandmother wasn't smiling. I had to force myself. 5,000 to start with, maybe more later. "They will be drafted?" Mom said. "Volunteers." "Good," Grandmother said. She and Mom went back to their flower making, done talking about it. At 17, Mike was barely old enough to join the Army, and then only with a parent's permission. I could see on Mom's face that there would be no permission. Mike looked at me, but I didn't know what to say. His exciting news didn't excite me. "Huh," I said. He turned around and left. Opinions blossom like flowers, or weeds. The Newell Star ran articles and editorials and letters. I heard adults talking, discussing, arguing at the mess hall, the canteen, standing in buzzing clusters in the cold. Kids brought their parents' ideas to school with them and debated them in the classroom. Not in my classroom, though, where Mr. Moffat started and ended the discussion with a sneer and a snort, ugly comment. "Jap boys fighting for us," he said. "Ridiculous." I had my opinion, but my opinion changed as often as Mr. Moffat slid another Chesterfield between his mustard-colored fingers and lit it. Now we'll get to prove ourselves, I'd think one minute. Now we'll be treated like Americans. This is an opportunity. In the next instant, I'd think of Mike, that he'd be 18 in less than a year, and the opportunity put on a scary mask that made me want to hide. When I joined the school conversations, when I wasn't under Mr. Moffat's buzzard-eyed watch, I didn't know which opinion to give. And Dad had once told me that it's hard to learn anything when all you can hear is yourself, so I mostly listened. A lot of the kids said their families were happy about the volunteer unit, but some weren't. Phillips, for instance. My dad says it's a slap in the face. He said one morning before school, "Our rights have been taken away along with our homes and most of what we owned, and now we're being asked to give our young men too?" It sounded like a quick little speech, as if he'd memorized his dad's words. "What does Miss Armstrong say?" I asked. Philip was practically in love with Miss Armstrong. "I don't listen to her anymore," Philip said. "You should," May said. "Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." "What's that mean?" Philip said. "It's from the Bible," I said. "I don't know the Bible," Philip said. "It means people who think they know it all are asking for trouble," May said. "To lose is to win," I said. "You're supposed to be humble." "My dad's tired of being humble," Philip said. He wasn't smiling. Sometimes there were differences of opinion within a family. Ours was one of those. Mike hated what had been done to us, but he also hated not being able to fight, to prove he was a loyal American. Now, he had a chance to show that the government had been wrong, to prove that his people didn't deserve to be locked up behind barbed wire. Grandmother sat on the opposite side of the argument. "Government," she said, a few days after the announcement. "They treat our children like dogs, yet want them to fight like men." She sounded like Philip's dad. She was looking at Mike when she said it, but he lay on his bunk, his hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling. A smile was frozen on his face. I wondered if he'd even heard her. "Just show me where to sign up," he said. "I can't wait." "You're too young," Mom said. "If you give your permission," he said. "I won't give permission," Mom said, and Grandmother nodded. "Ask Dad," Mike said. "Your father isn't here, and I know his answer." "I'll be 18 in 8 months," Mike said. "Then I'll need no permission." Mom walked to the window. Her back was to us as she looked out at the mud and homely buildings and cold gray sky. "You will still be part of this family," she said. "But when you are 18, you can make your own mistakes." I figured Mike's smile would fade. It didn't. He was expecting her words, willing to be patient. Part of me wanted to speak up for him. Part of me was relieved that Mom had told him no, that Grandmother was in Mom's corner. I did some figuring. By the time Mike turned 18 and joined the Army and got trained, it could be the end of 1943, even 1944. The war could be over. I had heard of more victories by the Navy in the Pacific, that the tide might be turning. But what about Europe? Who was winning that war? Would he be sent there to fight Hitler's army? I wanted Dad with us. I wanted him to talk to Mike. By late January, discussions over the combat team had faded a little. Then, Mom came home from work one night with more news. "They want us to register," she announced. "Register?" Grandmother said. "For what?" Mike said. Mom shrugged. "They say it's because of our boys going in the Army, and young people going off to college. The government wants to see who is eligible." "How will registering tell them that?" Mike said. "We are already registered," I said. "They know our names and who we are," Grandmother said. "They have given us numbers. We are here, under guard. What more do they want?" "Loyalty," Mom said. "We have to complete a form to prove our loyalty." Mr. Moffat thought registration was a good idea. "The Japanese should be happy to do their duty," he said at school the next day. He liked to talk about us as if we weren't there. They should welcome the opportunity to distinguish themselves from the riffraff. His words sounded familiar. I remembered the newspaper article that said we should cheerfully accept relocation. Most kids didn't know much about what was happening, but they were willing to start rumors or keep them going. My dad says this might be a way for us to get out of this place earlier. May said on the way home from lunch, "If we say the right things, maybe they'll trust us." "But where will they send us?" Philip said. "My dad says they'll use this registration as an excuse to ship us to Japan. He says we will sign nothing." "Rumors have spread like plague," Mom said when we were in our room that night. "But I have learned some things." "As have I," Grandmother said. "Me too," Mike said. They all looked at me. "I heard a rumor," I said. "Anyone who fills up the registration form left-handed will be sent to Japan on the next ship." Mike was left-handed. He tried to frown at me. He smiled instead. Mom and Grandmother shook their heads. "Let's sit and talk," Mom said, and we did. "The form is a questionnaire," Mom said. "Many questions," Grandmother said. 60, Mom said. "Some confusing ones." "I have to fill one out," Mike said. "Everyone 17 and older. They told us at school." 17. Not me. I was glad. 60 questions was way too many. But I didn't like the idea of Mike registering. It meant he was that much closer to joining the Army. We talked, huddled around our little stove, and it was time for supper. Then walked through the cold and over frozen ground to the mess hall. It was noisier than usual. People were standing in groups, visiting from table to table. May and her family came in and sat at our table with us, as they often did. It was good sitting close, having friends to talk to while we ate. A month earlier we had complained of being bored. Now that wasn't a problem. Talk continued over the next days. Fact, rumor. I tried to spread the left-handed one at school, but no one took it seriously enough to pass it on. On February 10th, there was a big meeting in the mess hall for everyone in our block. About 300 people. Registration was supposed to begin, but there were so many questions about the questions that most people refused to fill out the form until they got answers, and until they found out for sure what was behind the questionnaire. People had their own ideas about what questions the government wanted answered. Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? Who should go into the Army? Who should be sent to Japan? Who can go off to school? Who can be released from the camps? This thought, that we might be allowed to return home, or at least live outside the fences, stirred excitement into the bad feelings about registration. I asked Sandy if he knew anything. All he could give me was a sad face. "I'm just a soldier, Joe," he said. "I hear the same rumors you do. I just hope the good ones are true." "We have to go back tonight," Mom announced about a week later. The block manager came around. He said, "Come prepared to complete the questionnaires." Grandmother sat. "Will you help me with mine, Joseph?" She could read as well as I could, maybe better, but sometimes the meanings of words escaped her. She fidgeted nervously with the hem of her dress. "Sure," I said. "Together, we'll really foul it up." The mess hall was crowded. It smelled of that night's supper, mutton and fried potatoes and canned peas. Questions filled the stale air. The men who had represented us at meetings with the government got up and gave us empty answers. A few people, probably their families, clapped when they were finished. "Stooges," Mike said. The government guy gave us more answers. His main answer was a threat. Anyone who refused to register could be prosecuted under something called the Espionage Act. The penalty, he said, is $10,000 or 20 years in prison, or both. He got no applause. The crowd reacted with groans and angry muttering, and a few chuckles. If everyone in the mess hall pooled their money, it wouldn't amount to $10,000. "We are already in prison," Grandmother said. Philip's dad stood. "What about numbers 27 and 28? He shouted. "Answer 'em," the government man growled. "If you're smart, yes and yes." Philip's dad took his mom's hand and helped her up. Philip stood. They walked from the hall. We got in lines and brought forms back to our table. I sat with Grandmother. We puzzled over the questions while Mom and Mike worked across from us. We got to number 27. "Are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States on combat duty, wherever ordered?" "They want me to answer this?" Grandmother asked me. "All of them, Grandmother," Mike said. I looked at his form. He was nearly finished, left-handed. Grandmother shook her head. "Government," she said. She answered yes. Number 28 asked if she was willing to swear allegiance to the United States and renounce any allegiance to the Japanese emperor or any other foreign government. She studied the question. "Do you know what it means, grandmother?" I said. "It's one of the trick ones I have heard about." "It is," Mom said. She was stuck on the same question. "Your mother and I are not citizens here," grandmother said. "We cannot become citizens. How can I swear allegiance to a country that has no allegiance to me? How can I deny allegiance to Japan if this country won't allow me to stay here? Where would I go?" "Dad isn't a citizen either," I said. "How will he answer, grandmother?" asked Mom. "I don't know," Mom said. "I wrote to him and asked, but he hasn't written back." "Yes, yes," Mike said. "Dad's an American." "After all he's been through," grandmother said. "Yes, yes," Mike said. "Same as me." "Me too. I didn't have to answer the questionnaire, but I knew how I would have answered if I'd been old enough. With Mike. Yes and yes. And where do I sign up? If Mike's going to war, so am I." Mom and grandmother skipped number 28. I helped grandmother through the rest of the questions. Mike finished. Mom finished. Except for number 28. "I think Michael is right," she said finally. She answered yes. Now it was grandmother's turn. "Trick question," she said, staring at the paper. We sat while people went to the front and handed in their forms and filed out. I wanted her to answer yes, but she'd asked for my help, not my advice. Grandmother liked to give advice, not get it. Only a handful of people remained when she finally made her decision. "I have not felt an allegiance to the emperor since I left Japan 20 years ago," she said. "How can I renounce anything?" She drummed her fingers on the tabletop. "But I cannot be left without a country." She answered no. We honored her choice with silence, but I worried about what the decision would mean. Would she get deported to Japan? Were there already people at the camp requesting repatriation, which meant they wanted to go back, or, in the case of Nisei, go for the first time? Grandmother wasn't one of those. She wanted to stay with us, but would she have a choice? We handed in the forms and left. The next day, May and I walked back to the barracks together after school. She was excited, talking about possibilities. Now that her parents had sworn their loyalty, there was a chance her family could leave the camp. She had heard them talking about getting a sponsor, which meant the government might allow her family to settle somewhere locally, maybe on a farm, and live like regular people. "Maybe your family could find a sponsor close to us, Joe," she said. "We would have friends nearby." The thought raised my heartbeat like a run through knee-deep water. I imagined being outside the fences, walking with Dad, living in a house, going to a real school, lying in the grass field and looking up at the stars, never having to return to Thule. What if we could get out of the camp? Mike would be happy. Maybe he wouldn't be, so eager to join the army. He was waiting outside for me when I got back to the barracks. "I don't want grandmother to overhear," he said, walking me away from the thin wood walls of our building. "What?" I said. "I've heard more talk of letting Japanese Americans out of the camps." "Me too," I said. "They won't let grandmother go." I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to believe it. Why? She answered no. She'll be considered disloyal. They'll let her out when Japan is bombed into the ocean. I guessed he was right, and I knew if grandmother stayed, so would we. We wouldn't leave her. May's possibilities faded, like my memories of home. She said she would fight, but as soon as I said it, I had to smile at the picture of grandmother carrying a rifle across an open field with shells exploding all around her, raining chunks of dirt down on her helmet. Mike smiled too. "She's tough enough." "How could an old woman be a threat to the government?" I said. "All people who answered no will be treated the same. That's what everyone is saying. You're going to be here a while, Joe." "But you're not." 8 months, then I'll be gone." 5 minutes earlier, I would have reminded him of an alternative, leaving camp, living a normal life with us. Now, that wasn't a choice. Maybe it never was. The FBI considered Dad dangerous. Maybe they wouldn't release any of us. "You have to." "The government has never seen a Hanada fight. Neither have the Nazis. I have to show them." I went inside, puffed up by Mike's brave words, scared by them at the same time. A letter had arrived from Dad. I answered yes to both questions, he wrote. Mike had been right. I want to see my family again, as soon as possible. Maybe saying yes will help. I pinned his letter to the wall next to the others. Like his notes from someone marooned on a desert island, retrieved by someone marooned on another. Grandmother was working with her shells. For the first time in a long time, I sat down with my journal. The days of sameness had inspired me to write nothing. Now something, many things, had happened. I just needed to find the words. I began with a haiku. Winter sun creeps cold above the horse's collar. Fears blossom below.